All right, so let's get into a quick analysis and our expectations for the week on dollar. First, I'd like to point out last week, everything we were expecting played out as called. Notice how this candle right here, we ran into that weekly fair value gap we've been expecting to run into, and we rejected that. And again, our mind is still, however, on these highs right here. This is where I'm still focused on, even though we've had somewhat of a rejection there. What we have in place now is a fair value gap between this high and this low, and also this fair value gap here. So if we do see some type of more sell side pressure, I can expect the first area for the market to drop into would be here, and then eventually here. I think we've done a lot of again back and forth here in this whole area. Markets have sold, bought, sold. I mean, look at the wicks and the bodies, right? A lot of back and forth has occurred here. So I think if anything, we can go at most into this fair value gap, and then maybe find our footing and continue going higher. Let's go on the daily chart now. See what's going on there. So on the daily chart, right away, you can see. Notice again how we hit this level. We traded here aggressively. I wouldn't mind, if we could take out this low, that would be cool. We don't have to, but this is the obvious day liquidity pool. So if the market does run below there, it doesn't mean we are now focused on just sales. But that is a possibility, especially being that we've ran below this fair value gap here. We could watch to see if we want to trade a little lower below here and then maybe find support in this level. Again, we still cannot ignore the fact, though, that there is this weekly fair value gap here and here. So we're paying attention to those levels. And at certain times of the day, depending on the market's reacting to those levels, then we make our bias. But I do think we could find ourselves maybe a little in here. And again, also this daily fair value gap here. I don't want to overcrowd my charts. We can see, again, fair value gap level. And notice again, we've done a lot of back and forth in here on the daily chart. So I won't be surprised if we want to melt a little bit more and even all the way into here. It is important, though, that you do pay attention to your economic calendar. I do believe there's FOMC this week and the Israel-Palestine war going on. And I think USA is moving their Navy base or some of their boats or ships towards Hamas. I mean, towards Gaza. So, we want to pay attention to see if that causes any type of crazy spikes in price. And on a 4-hour basis, let's have that out right here. I like us trading potentially into here. So only thing that changes that stance is if we trade outside this daily fair value gap. As long as we're inside of it, especially below the midpoint of that fair value gap, this daily fair value gap. And really, if you look closer, there's a 4-hour fair value gap here. As long as you don't trade above that, let's go ahead and highlight that. Might as well. So as long as we don't trade above that and start finding support, I'm expecting us to drift into this fair value gap and maybe again into these lows. But one thing I like to point out, let's go on the hourly chart. I think my last video, I explained to you guys how I wanted to see us potentially trade into this daily level here, this order block here, and we got that, and we ran below these lows as I was also expecting. If you look at my last review. So again, my last review was on Wednesday of last week. So around here, I was telling you guys, I'm looking to see if we can gravitate towards this weekly opening gap. There's a weekly opening gap here. And we got that on Friday. Friday gave us that move lower. After trading higher into the high of that daily inverted fair value gap, taking out some liquidity here. We aggressively pulled into this level. And then so far, what we've done now is created another gap opening for this week. So I'm really watching this whole level here. If we stay above it, of course we're gonna push higher. But if we do find our way lower below this, then we can expect that move lower into, potentially taking out these lows and into that weekly fair value gap I was explaining. So this whole opening gap is sort of holding price up in my mind. And until that gives way, I'll stick to the fact that dollars are likely to be bullish, but I'm watching to see if this can give way. Once it gives way, I'm really gonna expect the price to drop a little bit more, take out these lows. So I think that's the dance for dollar. And today again, it's a holiday, so just consolidating. Can't expect much from the dollar today, but we do have this gap opening again, and let's watch how this really interacts with price. You can see what we've done so far. And here we just consolidated after hitting the previous week's opening gap, trade a little bit away from it, but that's about it on the dollar. Now let's get into the index. All right, so we're gonna start with ES, and again, this is all called out on previous week's discussion. I mentioned how this volume imbalance could hold off price. Ultimately, I think we're going below these lows, no question. But it held off price last week, and I think we can make our way potentially into this weekly fair value gap. And I'm really watching this weekly order block. Again, same thing I've told you. I told you guys about how this order block, right, and this little fair value gap here, how we traded into that, then sold off. I'm expecting the same idea here, where we can trade into this weekly fair value gap and maybe hit the body of this order block or even the wick of it. But I wouldn't mind us trading in there just for us to sell off more aggressively. And I think below here and here. But for this week, I'm just watching this fair value gaps right here. Now, if we do start making our way lower, I will, of course, draw the line here for that being the first liquidity pool, and then eventually here. So let's watch to see if S&P can give us some type of push into this fair value gap before a major sell-off. Let's go on the daily chart. So on daily chart, again, last week I mentioned we got to pay attention to this fair value gap here. And I said if we do climb above it, we could find our way above these highs. And we've climbed above it, especially here again aggressively on Friday. We haven't run above these highs yet, but I won't be surprised. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. And I think we can make our way into this fair value gap here on the daily chart. And if you look closer, it's kind of a volume imbalance right there on the daily. So I won't be surprised if we do make our way towards that. But notice how, again, we've ran, taken out this liquidity, and we've climbed out of that fair value gap. Now, let's see if we can also do the same and climb out of this fair value gap here to eventually trade into this weekly fair value gap. And I think ideally we should trade at least into this fair value gap here on the daily chart. And again, a lot of gaps on this chart, right? Let's go on a 15-minute chart. So look on the 15-minute chart. We have a gap opening from last week right here. So, and again, look at the interactions. How we hit there, sold off. And again, it's daily fair value gap. Look at also how price interacted with it, even though it's kind of messy, but you see interactions. And this week we have this gap here. So same thing with dollar. I really want to see how we can potentially get out of this, opening gaps and then make our way higher. If we push above all of this, I would expect us to find some support and then continue going higher. All right, guys. So I'm going to Yeah, so if we push out of all of this again, opening gaps, I'll expect to move higher. But today, so far, you can see how this fair value gap formed right here. Look at how we drove into that right at the high end of this weekly fair value gap I was talking about. I think it was a volume imbalance, one or two, but the shaded areas from a weekly level. But notice how we also created a lower time frame 50-minute fair value gap, and that was the catalyst that pushed us higher. And there's another fair value gap here that formed right at the previous new week opening gap, so previous week opening gap, and that pushes higher right onto this week's opening gap. I know it's a lot of opening gaps, but all those levels matter. You can see how the markets have interacted with them. Right when we hit here, we dropped aggressively. So it is a holiday. Let's see what happens. But I am expecting us to find our way higher. Unless we aggressively just start pushing lower, then yes, I'll expect us to continue that sell off. But I do want to see us at least take out some liquidity on the higher time frame. That's kind of what I'm expecting there on NASDAQ, on S&P. Maybe around these highs and just all of this right here. What stops that is if we, of course, find our way below the midpoint of this 4-hour fair value gap order block here. If we drop aggressively below that, then I will concede and say we're going to go lower. But for now, I want to see how we can climb out this little stuff and then go higher. It is FOMC this week, so we have to pay attention to all of that. I don't know if the Feds are doing an interest rate announcement. That'll be interesting if they are. But if they are, of course, it's even more caution that we should move more cautious. More caution. Let's go to NASDAQ real quick. All right, now NASDAQ. So again, same thing. We can see the volume imbalance here on the weekly level, holding up price, and we've already traded into the difference between NASDAQ and S&P. NASDAQ has already traded into this level. So this is a scenario where if NASDAQ starts dropping aggressively, S&P is not required to trade above those highs. I would love it to, but the fact that NASDAQ has already done that, it's a scenario where S&P does not have to. But again, NASDAQ is in this area where I will want to short. I am watching to see if we can maybe trade into this order block. These last two down close candles are order blocks, but sometimes I just like to use the last one. If we already traded, of course, beyond the second one or consecutive candle, I will tend to go this one, especially we are at the midpoint. It's sort of the midpoint of this weekly fair value gap. So expect to see some type of sell-off occurring there to take us lower and probably into this weekly fair value gap down here. Don't think it's going to happen this week, but that's where I'll be watching to see if we can trade into here. So let's go on a daily chart. Again, look at NASDAQ. We've already ran out these highs here. But notice we left equal lows here, so this is good. I don't think we need to run above this area here on NASDAQ. I think we can just stay. We can maybe trade a little higher. Let's go on the daily chart. You see there's a little volume imbalance there. And then we have a fair value gap overall. So I think, yeah, we can trade this a little higher. And then I want to see us destroy all of these lows here. Because I think this area here looks like a base where the market might be turning around, but I don't think we are going to trade above this consolidation here. I think at most going to this fair value gap, find some resistance, then trade off lower for the NASDAQ. Intraday. Again, we have a couple of weekly opening gaps. So previous week opening gap right here, extended out. The new week opening gap, extended out. You can see how we already interacted with it so far, hitting the low of it. Now we're trading above the new week opening gap's low. Let's see if we can get all the way to the high. I don't really care if we do, but that's kind of what I'm watching. So depending on how, for NASDAQ, if we do, I gotta wait for FOMC, but I'm expecting shorts. I won't mind if we do trade somewhat higher and then making our way lower again. But I'm watching these gaps to see how price interacts with it. It's a big gap, so I'm interested to see. If we go below it, then we also have to contend with this gap, and if we go below that, then we have a free way to really go lower. So those are all the barriers that are in place. But I'm watching to see what happens here on NASDAQ, but I am expecting us to eventually make our way lower. We are in that area. So let's just see what happens. But all this consolidation here, I like how we're setting this up. So I would love to see us continue going higher and then eventually come back down to take all of that and eventually take this low. So that's kind of like what I'm expecting for the week. So let's see if we get that, right? Let's see if we get what I'm expecting. And let's also be paying attention. Heart goes out to Israel, Palestine. Seems like the war never ends, but let's see what happens, on that side of things, and see how it really affects the markets here. But from that's pretty much it. I'll talk to you guys next time. Tune in for more videos and more clips of me breaking out these markets and analyzing these markets. I'm just trying to lend my experience I've had so far and my understanding of how prices are booked. So, and they've been playing out, right? If you look at my previous videos, they've all been playing out. So, talk to you on the next one. Like, subscribe, follow. Let's get this page to 500 subscribers. Thank you for tuning in. Talk to you on next one.